Welcome back to Drive. This week we are taking you on a run from the coast to the country. We've listened to your feedback and you told us that you wanted luxurious weekend getaways not too far from a major city. So we are going to end up at a beautiful Airbnb in Mudgee in country New South Wales. Right now, we're just outside a beautiful little town called Long, but our drive this week actually started on the Central Coast. So let's backtrack a little and have a look at exactly where we started.
No postcode envy, but every song's like gold teeth, grey goose dripping in the bathroom.
On this trip, we're going to take you from the east coast just north of Sydney out into one of our favourite parts of New South Wales, the region around Mudgee, where you'll find some of the state's best driving roads and its most beautiful countryside. The roads are fantastic, there's no shortage of interesting towns to visit along the way, and there's plenty to keep the kids entertained if you're doing the drive on school holidays. But we started this week's drive over here at the coast at Long Jetty. It's beautiful over here, but maybe not quite so sunny today, although it is trying to peek through the clouds. Do yourself a favour. This is a really easy 1 hour drive from Sydney, so start your coast to country road trip here. Head over to Tawoon Bay, grab a coffee, have some breakfast, check out the local cafes, there's plenty of them. Have a look at the surf over at Tawoon Bay. Of course, come and have a look at Long Jetty, and then do exactly what we're about to do right now, which is head for the country. The Mercedes-Benz EQS starts from $328,400 before on-road costs, and the range is an easy one for buyers to understand, with just one model available. Powering the EQS53 is a pair of electric motors and a 107.8 kilowatt-hour battery pack, good for outputs of 484 kilowatts and 900 newton metres in the standard model, with a 3.8 second 0 to 100 kilometre an hour sprint time and a top speed of 220 kilometres an hour. Optioning the $7,690 AMG Dynamic Plus package unlocks outputs of 560 kilowatts and 1,020 newton metres in race start launch control mode, making the EQS53 AMG's most powerful car on sale in Australia for a 3.4 second 0 to 100 kilometre an hour dash and 250 kilometre an hour top speed. Mercedes-Benz Australia claims up to 587 kilometres of electric driving range, but factor in around 500 kilometres in the real world around town.
I don't know what you've been told, but time is running out, no need to take it slow. I'm stepping to you toe to toe. I should be scared, honey, maybe so, but I ain't worried about it right now. Keeping dreams alive, 1999 heroes. I ain't worried about it right now. Swimming in.
You'll notice that despite the fact we're driving an electric vehicle on this drive, we haven't really talked a lot about charging, and that's not because it's irrelevant, but it's because this vehicle, the EQS53, has a particularly long range. It's just over 500 kilometres in terms of the claimed range. And if you're wondering why we chose this vehicle for this drive, it's because as we transition to electric vehicles, range anxiety will start to become a thing of the past, but we want to keep challenging ourselves with these vehicles that have got longer range and taking them on longer road trips, because of course a road trip like this is very typical of what most Australians will do on the weekend. So that's why we chose the EQS53 for this particular drive, and with a range over 500 kilometres, it does have the range to get the job done. Now that doesn't mean that we haven't had to charge it. We have had to do that, and we will charge it in Mudgee where we end our drive before we head back to Sydney, but it means you don't have to worry about it as much as you would if it had a range of 300 or even 400 kilometres. The other reason we've chosen the EQS is because this is a big luxury vehicle, and this is something of a luxury road trip. We wanted to stay in cute little towns, we wanted to stay in a nice Airbnb, and we wanted a vehicle that we felt linked up with that nicely, and the EQ platform does do this. It's effectively a big limousine, a large sedan. It's comfortable and it's beautifully insulated. That's the other thing as well, which adds to that feeling of luxury. So even though most of you are probably sitting at home knowing that you've got an SUV parked in the garage, it doesn't mean that a large sedan or a large saloon like we're driving now, regardless of whether it's electric or not, is still not perfect for this kind of road trip. The best thing about this coast to the country run is that you've got options in terms of which way you can come. We've decided to cut across through Wollombi. We're about to have some lunch in the Myrtle and Stone Cafe, and you should absolutely stop here if you're passing through town.
Somebody said we got a new friend, but does she love you better than I can? And there's a big black sky over my town. I know where you're at, I bet she's around.
The EQS is a pretty impressive vehicle to drive, and I guess you'd be expecting that given the price tag. You know, this is north of $300,000, so it's an expensive car. We don't really talk so much anymore about how rapid or how fast electric vehicles are because to one extent or another, they're all pretty quick, regardless of whether they're big, small, SUV, sedan, they're all pretty fast. This makes a lot of power and a lot of torque, but I really believe the EQS is about a lot more than the speed. The touring range is part of it, but the comfort, the luxury, the execution of the cabin, the insulation, how quiet it is, even without an engine and a driveline to mask that sound, it's still really quiet inside the cabin, and there's a sense of luxury to everything that you do about it.
Hey, you gotta bounce to this like this. You almost gotta watch it.
One thing I would say is you do have to pay attention to the fact that this is a big, heavy vehicle. So when you fire it into a twisty B road, it's fast and it'll handle it, but you do need to understand that you've got to use the brakes pretty aggressively if you want to pull up quickly from speed. So you need to keep that in mind when you're on your favourite B road, but that aside, you almost forget that this is electric, such as the ease with which that you can drive it. And of course, as we've said a couple of times, the range being so far out, 500 kilometres is an area that we've said many times before is a real, I think, a line in the sand for electric vehicles. So with a range of 500 kilometres, you don't really need to worry about it. You just get in, head off on your road trip, and you can usually charge when you get to your destination. That's exactly what we're going to do. In terms of how this is to drive, well, if your pockets are deep enough to extend to buying an EQS53, I reckon you're absolutely going to love it. These roads on this drive are fantastic. I said at the start of the show that one of the great things about driving from the coast to the country the way we're doing it is that you do have options. But this route that we've taken, which has taken us through Bylong, is sensational. The roads are amazing. They're twisty, they wind through the hills. You've got beautiful views, rock walls, hills and mountains and open fields. It's really, really pretty. And the other thing that's really interesting too is you get to pass through all these beautiful little towns, and you can stop in, you can have a bite to eat. If you're driving a regular vehicle, you can fuel up, of course. We stayed the first night in Denman. We're going to be spending a night in Mudgee as well. And you've got all these options of beautiful little towns to stop in. And on that note, that's one of the great privileges that we get here at Drive when we do these shows, is we get to stop in all these amazing little country towns. And at the moment, after the pandemic, I can assure you that they need your support. You need to come out on a road trip. You need to get in the car, pack it up and head off on a road trip and stop in and spend some time, and more importantly, spend some money in these country towns, because they have been hit particularly hard without visitors over the last couple of years. and they need our support now more than they ever have. So there's never been a better time for a road trip into any part of country Australia.
Am I living? Oh, what a funny thing to say. But there's alive and then there's living. Am I living for today? And I'm getting older.
As much as we suffered in the city during the lockdowns, our friends in the country suffered even more thanks to an almost complete lack of tourism traffic for nearly 2 years. That's why it's never been more important than it is right now to get out into the country and explore. There's so much going on in country towns as well, even during the winter period, and it doesn't really matter what you're into, you'll find something to keep you occupied if you're looking for a weekend away. I'll tell you the two things that feature most when you take this road trip straight through the heart of the Hunter Valley and then in behind the Blue Mountains to Mudgee where we're going: horses and grapes. And by that I mean horse studs. A lot of the famous names you've heard in horse racing circles, they've got breeding studs out the back of the Hunter Valley because it is just the perfect landscape and climate for breeding horses. But then you also notice the wineries. There are vineyards everywhere. And if you're into that kind of thing, this is the perfect kind of road trip for that. You can stop in, you can do tastings, you can obviously eat at a lot of the wineries too. Some of them have accommodation, but a lot of the local economies are based on that kind of thing. So if you stay in town, you can head into the wineries later on. And then of course, we will round out our drive this week in Mudgee. Mudgee's always been one of my favourite inland towns in New South Wales. In fact, in the whole of Australia, I've always loved Mudgee. It's got so much life. There's a real vibrant culture there. There's a lot of industry in Mudgee as well. Of course, there are vineyards there. A lot of people head out from Sydney to experience the vineyards, and it's an easy run if you're coming direct from Sydney. But I love Mudgee. It's got fantastic local produce, amazing cafes, some fantastic old pubs, beautiful old pubs that have been renovated and rebuilt, but sympathetically. And there's always somewhere good to grab a meal as well. So it's a fantastic little country town. If you want to stop in, you can even spend a week there. We'll only be spending a couple of nights, but if you want to spend a week there, there's plenty to do in Mudgee. And as I said before, the scenery on this drive through the back of the Hunter Valley, it doesn't get much better.
Caught up in heaven, but your heaven ain't the same. And I've never been a saint, have I? This evanescence always flees.
You'll hear us talk a lot about the views, scenery, and how picturesque it is out here, and that is something you really should take the time to soak up. Factor in the time to stop, take photographs, and enjoy the view. Photography has never been easier to access than it is right now, and it doesn't matter whether you've got the latest smartphone or all the professional photographic gear, you'll have to go a long way to find more beautiful landscape photography than you can find in this part of New South Wales. 261 kilometres northwest of Sydney, Mudgee sits in the fertile Cudgegong River Valley with a population of almost 13,000 people. Many place names around Mudgee are derived from the Wiradjuri language of the traditional Indigenous inhabitants. Those of you familiar with Mudgee will understand how much it's transformed in the last few decades as well. I remember going out to Mudgee as a kid, and it was very much a farming and rural outpost. It was still a busy little town, but it was mainly locals, the local farmers. There was a little bit of industry there. But what's changed in the last couple of decades is the quality of the roads that lead out to Mudgee has improved drastically. Obviously, modern cars have made a difference there as well because it's so much easier to get around. But the other thing that's changed is the cosmopolitan nature of the town. There are those wine tasting bars, there are updated and renovated pubs, and the feeling of the place has changed as more people from the big cities have gone out there to visit. And I think, you know, the locals might not agree necessarily, but I really think it's changed Mudgee for the better because it's given visitors even more of a reason to come into town and spend a little bit of time visiting.
We gonna ride till we fall. They say we got no future at all. They wanna keep us out, can't hold us down anymore. We gonna ride till we fall.
Many place names around Mudgee are derived from the Wiradjuri language of the traditional Indigenous inhabitants. Surrounded by towns like Hargraves, Gulgong and Hill End, where gold was found, the population of Mudgee exploded during the gold rush, and it's the second oldest municipality west of the Great Dividing Range. Nowadays, Mudgee is a significant winemaking region, as well as the farming that surrounds the town. We've been cursing the rain in the cities along the east coast over the last 6 to 12 months because it's seemingly never ending. However, the rain has been a real benefit for farmers out here in the country, and it's a beautiful time to be out here. It's a real privilege to be out here at the moment at this time of year, but after the amount of rain that they have had out here because it's so much greener than it otherwise might have been. What better way to end our luxury coast to the country drive than right here at the stunning Evansley Boutique Airbnb just outside the centre of Mudgee. This is a beautiful property and I am incredibly privileged to be spending the night here. Now do yourself a favour, when you come to Mudgee, make sure you give yourself more than one night because it's an incredibly vibrant country town. There's so much to see and do. And yes, you can stay at a place like Evansley, where we're staying this evening, but there's plenty of other accommodation options to suit every budget, plenty of great places to eat as well. So if you head out to this part of New South Wales, give yourself the time to explore. Now, one last thing before we go. Those of you who watch the show regularly have probably been thinking that this kind of beautiful Airbnb is the kind of thing that only Emma gets to do, while I'm left sleeping in a swag with a fire admittedly, but usually out in the bush somewhere in remote Australia. Well, didn't happen this week. I managed to get myself into the luxury accommodation and I have no idea where Emma is going to be staying next week. And on that note, join us next week for another great drive. We started our drive out on the coast near Long Jetty before heading to Denman for our first night on the road. We passed through Cessnock and Pecolbin on what was an enjoyable country cruise. Leaving Denman, we took the scenic Bylong Valley Way into the back of Mudgee, one of the most enjoyable driving roads in the region. Night 2 was spent in Mudgee at a stunning Airbnb. Premium luxury vehicles have specific tyre needs, and the right tyre means you can fully enjoy your luxury experience behind the wheel of a vehicle like the EQS we've driven on this trip. For all your tyre needs, head to your nearest Bob Jane T-Marts.
For more information on pricing and specifications, head to drive.com.au. Plus, get all the details for this drive by scanning the QR code on your screen or visiting us online.
Next week, Emma finds more luxury accommodation while travelling from the city to the surf, driving from Brisbane to Noosa in a sporty BMW on the lookout for secret lakes.
Keen to see some of the roads we've already driven? Well, you can download the Roads by Porter app and perhaps tackle them yourself.